This is the BioCentury Show.
Brought to you by the 5th East-West Biopharma Summit in South Korea. In March, explore how to globalize Asia innovation and connect with key players across Asia's innovation arc, from India to China to Japan.
Hello, I'm Steve Usdin, BioCentury's Washington editor. I'm joined today by Peter Kolchinsky, co-founder and managing partner of IRA Capital. Peter is invested in the creation of iconic biopharma companies that have transformed the lives of patients. He's also one of the industry's most thoughtful and persistent public policy advocates. Peter, today, I want to talk with you mostly about things that can be described with three letters: FDA, MFN, IRA, RTF, HHS, CMS, NIH, and WTF. So,
oh yeah, WTF for sure.
And so everything's a WTF. So let's start with FDA. It's Thursday, February the 12th. FDA has recently refused to review Moderna's flu vaccine. That's just the latest. We've seen a whole year of chaos at the agency. What do you make of it? And how do you think about investments that are predicated on some level of regulatory predictability?
So, yeah, we certainly are mindful of it. I'm grateful that a lot of the projects that we're working on are going to require long enough to play out that I have faith that we can somehow fix the FDA. Now, I can't tell you that I have faith that we're going to fix the FDA with, current leadership at the helm. But one way or the other, I can't imagine the American people are going to be okay with, seeing the FDA turn into a choke point that, blocks novel medicines from getting to market. We do see some medicines getting to market. They seem to be getting there, oftentimes now with a delay. I got to admit, I think that maybe the agency is starting to be so short-staffed that we should just bake in a 3-month minimum delay, for even the best drugs. A delay just shaves some of the value off something, but it doesn't make it totally uninvestable. It's just a shame, to waste that patent time. It's a shame to, delay access for patients. But, we can work with it. In the vaccine space, I got to admit, if I had to be submitting a vaccine for approval today with this administration, I'd be applying a really heavy discount. Like I just don't understand the underlying logic, and I'd have to learn the rules of MAHA, to figure out what plays and what doesn't play. And I'm not. That's not me. So I'm not likely to understand the rules of MAHA. For anything where we can develop it, anywhere where we can develop drugs outside the U.S. for a while, to buy ourselves time before having to come to the U.S. and seek approval for anything, we now think very strongly about doing that. I trust the whole rest of the world to remain logical, more than I trust right now the U.S. regulatory environment.
No, that's amazing, because that's a huge shift from just before a year ago, I think. So you're saying for your companies, you're saying if it's possible, seek regulatory approvals outside the United States first.
Well, I mean, no, not quite that. I'm saying, to be clear, regulatory approvals for doing trials, not regulatory approval for getting on the market. Because let's face it, the rest of the world's not, all that profitable. So that's not going to ever drive our strategy. But if you can do your phase 1-2 studies outside the U.S., do them outside the U.S. Right? Mm-hmm. I don't know anymore. Like, even if I believe that the FDA regs haven't changed for what would be allowed to initiate a study, I'm just not confident that the teams inside the FDA, by the time we file for that request, file that IND, that they will have the bandwidth to give us a timely review. And will they tell us, hey, we're just totally short-staffed here, like there's nothing wrong with your submission, we just need more time? Or will somebody feel obliged to sort of dig in, find an extra risk that maybe is not that big a deal, and use that as the basis for saying that they need more time? And, I can't afford those risks, so I would rather operate elsewhere. Australia is efficient at phase 1s. UK can be good for that. So whatever you can do outside the US, do it outside the US. And when you absolutely have to come back to the US, like for your global registrational study, well then, take a deep breath and get in there.
Mhm.
right?
Are there particular therapeutic areas, particular modalities that you are more confident of or less confident of, besides vaccines, which is obvious, with this current FDA?
I would just say anything new, right? Anything new always requires extra time. When oligos were new, man, like I sat and sit on the board of some oligo companies, so I know all the discussions back and forth with agencies around the world, and the FDA would ask some questions that other agencies didn't have an issue with, and turned out not to be an issue. There were animal quirks that didn't manifest elsewhere. Now, this was even before this current administration, so the FDA has already been sort of more tightly wired when it's come to assessing risks before allowing you to start a trial. With this administration now, when people are so squeezed for time, I just don't know how it's going to play. So you have those discussions, but you parallel track submissions everywhere else.
Mm-hmm. So another initial, MFN, most favored nation. 16 companies have done secret deals with the Trump administration. Now the White House is pushing to codify MFN, though it isn't really clear what it is.
Yeah.
How do you think about MFN when you're thinking about investments and when you're thinking about advising, your portfolio companies, for example, on pricing and launch strategies,
Yeah.
or more broadly?
Yeah. So I've been writing about MFN for a long time. There's several chapters in my book, the Great American Drug Deal, which came out beginning of 2020, but several chapters in my book that deal with it. And the policy itself, as you point out, is still a bit vague. But for years, I've been telling companies that if you're going to do an ex-US deal, you need to bake into your partnership agreement some kind of mechanism to take back the drug or control their price outside the US, because someday if there's a law that couples the US price to international prices, you're going to really regret that you gave away the power to control the ex-US price to some partner. And one of my companies listened to that when they did an ex-US deal and baked that into their partnership agreements. This was several years ago, so they were prepared for MFN and are in a better position to navigate it now. I think that MFN is one of those policies that sounds good if you only think one chess move ahead, but if you then think a few more steps ahead, you realize that it backfires pretty badly. We have no evidence that other countries are really willing to pay higher prices sustainably for the long run. Maybe if you threaten them with various trade trade hits, tariffs on this or those products, they might for now say, okay, we'll pay a bit more. But unless those that trade pressure is going to be permanent, unless we can count on some future administration 10, 15 years from now to be doing the same thing, I'm not at all sure that other countries are going to still be paying higher prices for medicines than they pay today. Bottom line is, I've reconciled myself to the fact that other countries are free riders, on what the U.S. pays. That doesn't mean the U.S. is overpaying. That's a whole different topic of discussion. But medicines are worth, their value is far greater than their price. Even their prices in the U.S. Other countries just simply get a better bargain, typically with a bit of a delay and whatever.
Yeah, but what happens when the U.S. administration says, and at least 16 companies say they're going to comply with this, that launch prices going forward are predicated on benchmarked against other countries' pricing?
So what happens is that a company can try. They can say, okay, well, then we're going to set the certain limits. We're not going below those limits. They're pegged to the U.S. price, adjusted on a GDP per capita basis, as the current experiments seem to be indicating companies should do. And if other countries aren't willing to pay, then we just won't launch there. And that is something that the current administration would be happy with. it's not even that they necessarily want the U.S. price to come down. They just don't want anybody else getting a free ride or a subsidized ride. And so we will just have to factor out some ex-US sales. It'll mean that doing an ex-US partnership isn't going to bring in as much money. You may not even be able to do an ex-US partnership anymore. I don't know. It'll mean that the global value of a drug will go down. Now, I estimate that probably about 70 or 80% of the total profits of any drug are likely to come from the US market. But we're talking about sacrificing 20 to 30% of the NPV of a novel drug. So it's just made success a bit less rewarding, right? Now, can you
and it's
deal
also
with that?
it also, yes. Maybe if you look at it from that standpoint of an investor, it's also meant that patients in other countries may not get access to drugs that they should be getting access to.
That would make the current administration quite happy, right? As you know, this is about America first. And I don't think they care much if this is going to increase the suffering outside the United States. And look, I can also sympathize with that point of view that other countries are responsible for their citizens. We invent the drugs. We're offering at a price that I would argue is a bargain and is fair. Those countries spend a fortune on their own healthcare when they have to build an incremental hospital to deal with a disease that could have been averted if they had treated their patients. Like, I think they should have done the cost effectiveness on that incremental hospital, but they don't. All of healthcare services, over there, they're inherently local. They can't free ride off the U.S. Medical system for hospitals. And so they don't ask NICE in the UK to tell them whether it's worth it to build an extra hospital. They just do. But only, something that where they could free ride, like a medicine, that's where they tell NICE, hey, do your magic formula thing and give us some justification for paying as little as possible. And our industry has basically said, like, well, it's better to make some money in the UK rather than no money, right? And so if MFN ties companies' hands and they, basically say, look, we're not launching drugs in the UK anymore. What will happen is that you will see more examples of the consequences of those countries not paying more. More people will suffer. I'm not going to look at that with glee, but it is going to be interesting to find out, will those companies care? Or will China simply say, we're over here, we've got like the fifth in class on something, we're happy to launch that for you. And will all those countries just say like, oh, great, we'll just pivot to China? And that's exactly what I think will happen. I think there's a version of MFN, a very narrow one, that would allow you to run the experiment without handing the rest of the world to China. And we can talk about that.
Well, yeah, let's do that briefly, yeah.
Okay, well, so imagine if instead of using MFN to peg US prices to a whole basket of other countries, what if you just picked one? What if you just said US prices, cannot be higher than France's on a GDP per capita adjusted basis? France, pays much less than the US on, even comparing net prices. Then, we would basically dictate to France like, hey, sorry, we're limited. We got to charge these higher prices. And France can say yes or no. I think odds are they're going to say no, rather than suddenly like jack up their spending on medicines. But we can then experiment with, well, we're going to put trade pressure on you. Like, we're not going to buy your cheese or whatever unless you, spend more on medicines. It's the same principle as like NATO spending. Like, hey, you need to spend more of your GDP on medicines. And so other countries will get to see what happens when, a country like France holds out. Now, France alone is probably not a... Oh, sorry.
Yeah. I just want to interrupt really quickly. I think what you're going to see is parallel. If you did that, you would see parallel imports. You would see other ways that French patients and the French government would evade those kinds of limits.
And we can deal with those things when we get to them. But ultimately, if you're monitoring the volumes of your drugs, it would be suddenly weird if Denmark was consuming like way more medicine because they're shunting, all their drug supply to France. So there are ways of dealing with imports. But let's just run the experiment before we make it the law for the whole world, right? In fact, the current MFN policy is technically a CMMI experiment, over the next 7 years. Let's make it, a more focused experiment and let's find out what happens without handing the rest of the world to China. China is probably not going to spin up a whole strategy of catering, to the broader market just for France. In the meantime, we can sell our drugs at whatever the highest prices that we can negotiate in all the other countries. And if those happen to be, much lower prices, so be it. But as those countries watch, as France deals with this reference pricing issue, like if indeed their citizens suffer, for lack of access, they will know that they will be next, right? And eventually we'll expand MFN to the UK. And then the UK will know, like, damn, we're going to now suffer like France did. Like, and if they're willing to suffer, so be it. That's the answer. And maybe that's not a policy we choose to pursue. But if France actually is willing to pay more, well, then you basically tell the UK, hey, in 6 months, we're pivoting to you. Are you sure you need to go through this whole experiment? Or would you like to just agree that you'll pay more and we'll skip over you and, we'll focus on Germany or Denmark next? In fact,
Well,
I would love to see MFN just for Ozempic to Denmark alone. I like, it's just galling, really, right? That Denmark profits as much as it does off of, the American market, while itself paying a deeply discounted price for Ozempic. Just for Ozempic alone, it would be smart policy for Denmark to say, oh, actually, yeah, we do pay the US price on a GDP per capita basis for Ozempic. It's totally worth it, America. Like, that would be smart to signal that, don't you think? And Denmark doesn't even bother.
Well, I think it's a good thing, at least for the patients of France, that you're not running the CMS, and that I think it's very unlikely that we're going to see a political environment where the president's going to say, rather than we're going to make America great again or America first, we're just going to say France last.
Well, no, it's still America first. It's just, peg it to one country, not all of them. Like this could still be framed all in terms of, Trump economics and, fairness and MFN or whatever, but without breaking, the innovation model that's working. Don't break what we have and what's working now in the effort to make it better or fairer and get the rest of the world to pay more. I would love to see the rest of the world pay more. I would love to run experiments to figure out how we can use trade diplomacy to get other countries to spend more on, call it biodefense, disease defense, but we've done with NATO.
But just to put a point to it, because we got to take a quick break. Basically, what you're talking about, though, is trying to make other countries pay more, but you're not envisioning MFN policies actually reducing costs to American patients or taxpayers.
Well, actually, it may, because whenever you make a market bigger, you attract more competitors. So I wrote about this in one of my articles on how to actually address free riding issues in trade diplomacy. And I pointed out, like, in the US, I think we've got like 4 SGLT2s. That's pretty good. You actually get a lot of price competition, and you get bigger rebates. But at the margin, if you got 5 or 6 SGLT2s, you get more competition. We had 3 Hep C cures, but if you had a 4th, you would have gotten slightly lower net prices, right? And so competitors, all of these companies that are working on drugs, they can calibrate to the global market. And when they see that one has launched, then they know, like, all right, well, if I make it to the market, I'll be second and I'll split. And then they see a second launch and they're like, all right, damn it. Well, if I make it to the market, I'll be third and I'll get some share. And at some point, the 4th player looks at the market and says, it's too small to support me as a 4th player, and they drop out. But if the global market's bigger, then the 4th player might decide to stay in and might decide to come to market. Maybe the 5th player does too. And so when you see more drugs launch in every drug class in all markets, that's how the price comes down in all markets.
Well, with that, let's take a quick break, and we'll be right back. And then when we come back, I want to talk to you about some of the public policy positions you've taken on controversial topics.
Sure.
The BioCentury Show is brought to you by the 5th East-West Biopharma Summit in South Korea. An arc of innovation is emerging across Asia, and Western biopharma leaders are taking note, from cross-border deals to new co's. In March 2026, the 5th BioCentury Bay Helix East-West Biopharma Summit visits South Korea for the first time. Meet the biopharma leaders putting Korea innovation on the global map. Learn why Korea has become a clinical trial and manufacturing hub. Discover if Korea is the next hotspot for new co-formation. Plus meet biopharma innovators from India to Singapore to China and Japan. Register now at biocenturyeastwest.com.
I'm back with Peter Kolchinsky talking about public policy and things that start with three letters. You've taken a lot of public positions on topics that most of your peers stay silent about, things like immigration, equity, free speech. Why do you think that that's important, and why do you think that others aren't, others who are your peers in the investment community, the leaders of CEOs of biopharma companies, are reticent to step there?
Look, I think it's important because I'm not defined by my job. I'm a human being, and I think we are all full human beings with our own stories and our own, priorities and values. I'm an immigrant. My parents were immigrants. Like, I know the immigrant experience. I think America is better for its immigrants. Yes, I appreciate the importance of legal immigration, all that kind of stuff. But when you see what's happening today, the brutality, and disdain with which America is treating its immigrants, legal and illegal immigrants, it hurts, just hurts. We've got a lot of people on the IRA Capital team, who are immigrants themselves. And I think that, when you're part of a team and there's this pain on your team as everybody comes into work having just read the morning news and the latest, WTF story, right? Since we're talking three-letter acronyms. If no one says anything, then everyone's internalizing their pain. And, eventually that leaks out. It leaks out in, having less joy in what you do in life, less joy, in the hallways, less joy just in general. And I think it's better to talk about it. So internal to RA Capital, we talk about these things. We make it okay for people to share their views. And then when you share some of that, and then people say, like, can I share this with my family? Can I forward this to the company that I'm with? Because we got venture partners that run companies. And it's like, yeah, share it. And so then at some point you're like, and maybe some of this stuff, like, we would actually say publicly, in order to help other people ultimately feel like, yeah, that's what I'm thinking too, right? And why don't other people do it? I think other people worry that it's not what their investors want them to do. Well, I crossed that bridge a long time ago, and I discovered that your investors are human too, and they are dealing with a lot of these feelings internally. And I discovered a long time ago that it's okay to talk about defending the patent system and market-based pricing and advocating for insurance reform, which are not, as disputable and debatable as maybe America's immigration policy or abortion or things like that. They're more, you would argue, in our lane. But it was a stepping stone, right? It was a stepping stone to discovering that your investors and the broader community, like, they don't mind you speaking up. They may even appreciate you voicing some of the things that are on their mind and defending their values. So I discovered the water's warm. So I did it. I've noticed other people have started doing more of it. I'm not the only one who speaks up. And I like that about our community, that we've got a group of people out there that are comfortable speaking up and, having this stuff be at least somewhat on the outside. So it's not just poisoning us on the inside.
So here's something that's squarely in the biopharma world's lane, and that surprised me when people who were in positions of authority didn't speak out. Okay, everyone in biopharma knew that Robert F. Kennedy would be a disaster for public health and that he would be a threat to their companies. And I don't have any doubt that if, when his nomination was announced, there had been forceful public statements from CEOs, from Albert Bourla, from Dave Ricks, from other CEOs of pharma companies, that they would have found 3 Republican senators who had the courage to sink the confirmation. Instead, they were silent. Their silence was interpreted as consent. Do you think, looking back on it, that did they do the right thing for their companies, for the industry, for patients?
Oh man, I mean, look, I can tell you I wasn't silent, and I was lobbying, those members of Congress right down to the last minutes. And if we all spoke up and did that, yeah, maybe we would have averted some of what's been happening. But what else is new? Our industry doesn't use its voice. It's not strategic. Like it's the reason I started writing all the stuff that I have been about the biotech social contract, going back to I think 2017. My first big article on the biotech social contract came out towards the end of 17. And I've been writing ever since. Is precisely because our industry has assumed that things would never get so bad that just working through bio and pharma wouldn't keep things moving along and everything would be fine. We're still in the realm of mostly genteel politics, white papers. You expect people to be reasonable, and clearly things have shifted to a more populist phase, where it's kind of more street fighting. If you don't have control, um, of your public image, if you don't have your own direct connection with the broader audience and the electorate, you don't matter, right? And so you got to figure out how to speak more authentically to people. You got to sometimes, just say, uh, insurance fucking sucks sometimes, and it's totally not fair that people are getting fucking railroaded with out-of-pocket costs. You paid your goddamn premiums your whole life, and then you get cancer and they fucking charge you more out of pocket than you can afford for your chemo. Because what? You might be faking your cancer to score some chemo? What the fuck? See, that's authentic. When you say that, and I have actually said that, probably with fewer F-bombs on stages, like people sit up, they look up from their iPhones, they're like, that feels real. Because it is real. That is the root of the injustice that a lot of people, are expressing when they're angry about drug prices. But our industry can't even agree that like every time anybody raises drug prices, the first question you should ask is, pardon me, can we just clarify, prices to whom, charged by whom? Are we talking about prices charged by companies to insurance plans, or do you mean the prices that patients experience? And of course, most interviewers would be like, oh, well, I'm referring to the prices patients experience. Oh, so you mean the prices that are set by insurance plans, the ones that can take a $5 generic drug and jack it up to be unaffordable, as Mark Cuban has showed us, or they can take a $300,000, miracle drug for cystic fibrosis and make it completely affordable to everybody. So yeah, let's keep talking about insurance. But nobody ever pauses. We immediately just, start talking about drug prices and R&D and risk and all that kind of stuff. But like, have a strategy, take control of the terms of the debate, right? It's what I do when anybody asks me about drug prices. It's like my go-to move, right? And I just still don't see it from bio, from pharma, from anybody. So look, most of the leaders out there are so busy listening to their own advisors. I'm sure they're not reading my articles, right? I'm not going to be the guy
Hopefully they're reading mine.
I hope they're reading yours. And so like, if you were to write out, like, here is the playbook for everybody who is ostensibly a representative of our industry. When asked about drug prices, you should first clarify, to whom, charged by whom. By the way, also, new rule, never use the word recoup. Nobody invests to recoup their investment. You try to generate a return on investment. If all of our biotech leaders are going to use the goddamn word recoup, Bernie Sanders and everybody else in Congress will happily ask, how much did you invest in that program? And then like, how much have you made since? Oh, look, how much more you made than you invested. You already recouped your investment. I don't see why, you get to charge more. stop using the word recoup. I got a whole long list. In fact, I stuck a whole bunch of ideas into this one article on the Massachusetts paradox. We can't even seem to get our shit together enough to stop, making these various footfalls and creating own goals.
So quickly, because I want to move on to something else. So you've done a really good job of identifying things that you think that the industry has done wrong, of things that are impediments to innovation. We're going to talk about some more later, or the IRA, different things like that. How do you, given all of that, then how do you go to investors? How do you persuade investors that, well, give me your money, and despite all of these things, we're going to be able to create fantastic medicines and, by the way, make a lot of money?
Because ultimately, I think there's way too much to be gained from what science can do to push back disease and ultimately get us, to some vision of the future where we live longer, healthier, with less spending on hospitals and doctors. It's just too much to be gained to believe that for any extended period of time, we're really going to destroy it all. And I believe that the worse it gets, the more people come out of the woodwork and say, whoa, it's getting pretty bad. Like, we should do something about it. Because, I was certainly fighting like hell with a handful of peers against the IRA back when we knew that it was coming, right? And I think we managed to muster like a whopping 1,300 signatures, to one of our letters that we published through No Patient Left Behind, basically explaining to Congress like why this is a bad idea. But after the IRA passed, a lot more people stepped up and said, whoa, this is pretty bad. I'm like, yeah, you think? This was avertable because, if instead of 1,300 signatures, if we had gotten like 130,000 signatures, I think maybe it would have mattered. All it would have taken is one Democratic senator. They all had the power of a Kirsten Sinema or a Manchin, if you recall. All it would have taken is any one of them walking into Senator Wyden's office and being like, yeah, I'm going to need you to change 9 to 13 or you don't have my vote. They would have changed it. It wouldn't have been a big deal, but not one of them did. Not one, even from states that had biotech and pharma in it. And it's because we as an industry just let it happen. We did not lobby as fully with our full voices. We didn't all stand. We had a lot of bystanders. You think France free rides? How about all the silent people that won't even sign a letter? It's pretty pathetic. We did it to ourselves. But after it passed, more people stepped up. And after MFN, suddenly is, a real live experiment with consequences, more people step up. So I believe that as things get worse, you'll see, a greater response, which will ultimately avert the worst. And so a lot of this is smoke, thick black smoke that can choke you sometimes. But this doesn't mean we're going to, that the industry is going to burn up. It just means that we're going to end up having to fight even harder and to do a better job of documenting the harms of the current, still kind of narrow policies. You think about it, we're actually pretty lucky that both Medicare negotiation and MFN really only apply to Medicare, some Medicaid. Like a lot of diseases, for example, migraine is largely unaffected by this, right? It's mostly younger people. Lupus, largely unaffected, but we're getting a taste. Small molecule, early stage development for Alzheimer's. Yeah, I have a hard time justifying that. That is squarely in the strike zone of MFN's pill penalty, right? And there are going to be some conditions where I was really counting on the global market, where a lot of the patients were ex-US, and now I don't know how to navigate MFN. So that's going to be a problem. But for the most part, there's plenty of projects to still work on. It's just really important that we focus on those areas where MFN and the IRA hit hardest, and that we use those examples, and we shine a light on it, and we say, like, we don't really want this to happen to everything else. So fight harder.
So we've actually run over time, but I'm gonna use my prerogative and keep going anyway. Because I want to ask you about the one thing. So there's two things that every single conversation I have with people about public policy over the last year or two have been about. One is about the FDA. We've talked about that. The other is China. Okay. And
Yeah.
and there's actually an even bigger, I would say, divergence between the biopharma industry and the political leaders in America over China than there is over drug pricing, because there's bipartisan support in Congress aligned with the Trump administration for disentangling the US and Chinese economies. A lot of that, some of that anyways, aimed at biopharma, for example, the BioSecure Act that passed last year. And if you ask many members of Congress from either party, they would say that more has to be done to disentangle the United States and Chinese biopharma industries at the same time that you have, AstraZeneca and Pfizer and every other large pharmaceutical company, investors like you, going to China and trying to actually to more tightly integrate the Chinese ecosystem into the U.S. ecosystem. What do you think? How does that get resolved? And more broadly, how do you think about China?
Yeah, so I think that a lot of the lessons that we learned about China come from industries where the supply chain is a really big deal. Making iPhones, for example, making solar panels, batteries, whatever, like all that kind of stuff is really capital intensive. Like the supply chain is intensive. It's really sophisticated equipment, lots of people, labor, et cetera. I get it. Once you built all that and you're really dependent on manufacturing, it's hard to shift. And so those can be weaponized against you, and the American public might be deprived of something that they value. So, how does that apply to medicines, right? Well, I would argue we should invent globally and manufacture locally. So we would benefit considerably from using a lot of the efficiencies that China offers to streamline R&D, get to proof of concept faster. We then have to do the global registrational studies anyway, largely outside of China. And when we find out which medicines actually work and get them approved, yeah, I think it makes good sense to make sure that those medicines are manufactured where we can be confident that they will remain in production. Nobody will ever weaponize those supply chains against us. So does it have to be on US soil? Well, if we're beefing with every other country in the world, yeah, I guess so. But if maybe we could stop beefing with, some of them, European countries, Canada, et cetera, then we can take advantage of some of the efficiencies in manufacturing in those, aligned countries. But to cut ourselves off from China's R&D, why exactly? At the end of the day, we're all better off if there's peace on earth, right? So if there's one area to leave a bridge of collaboration between nations that hopefully will someday come to terms and have a more broadly peaceful collaboration in many other sectors, let it be the pursuit of cures. Our shared humanity, our love of our children, our parents, and each other, it's the one thing we absolutely have in common with just about everybody else, every other culture in the world. Everyone's driven to, want to help their children, they see an orphan disease, they just want to help that child. So we're here inventing cures. That's not that doesn't lend itself to weaponization. There's no realistic world where China says, well, you're totally dependent on us for your R&D, and guess what? We're shutting you off from being able to invent new medicines. America barely cares about inventing new medicines. Did you see? We passed the pill penalty, and we're doing other dumb stuff to shut down our own innovation. So Americans only love what they already have. And so that's not going to be the most potent thing that China can weaponize when we're reliant on them for R&D. Rather, lean into the fact that China wants to be great at a lot of the stuff involved in R&D, and the best it can be good at is all the stuff up through proof of concept, but they cannot possibly become good at doing the global registrational studies because they don't have the, patient diversity. Their population is just, just Han Chinese practically, right? So it's extremely narrow in its ethnic diversity, and therefore necessarily US and Europe will always require that drugs pass through a global registrational study, which means that there will always be that development infrastructure. There's just a limit to what China's going to be able to do to weaponize that pre-proof of concept infrastructure. I think we should all just continue to enjoy that collaboration, bring down R&D costs, speed medicines to market, and it may help lower costs in the US and elsewhere, and allow us to get to that holy grail of a healthy 100 years, for everybody sooner.
Well, with that healthy 100 years goal, we'll wrap it up today. And I thank you for a really a fascinating conversation. I look forward to more.
Thanks for having me, Steve.
Brought to you by the 5th East-West Biopharma Summit in South Korea. In March, explore how to globalize Asia innovation and connect with key players across Asia's innovation arc, from India to China to Japan.
Kendall Square Orchestra provides the music for the BioCentury Show. The group connects science and technology professionals and other members of the greater Boston community to collaborate, innovate, and inspire through music while supporting causes related to healthcare and education.